Emitting events has proven to be the best way to update data in a parent component from a child component. There are libraries out there that make sharing data between components easier. We'll get into those later in this course. In this lecture, I want to introduce an alternative solution for updating data in the parent component from the child component. Callback functions can be used to update data. If you are familiar with React, then you will feel right at home with this method of sharing data. Creating callback functions is a very simple process. Let's explore how to create one. Inside the app component, let's create another method called updateAgeCB. It will do the exact same thing as the updateAge function. I'm creating two versions of the same function so that we can compare the difference. We're going to pass this function down to the user component. You heard that correctly. You're not limited to sending down primitive values. You can also send down functions, objects, and arrays. We can pass this function to the user component just like we would for any other prop. Inside the template, we'll bind an attribute to the user component called AgeChangeFN with the value of updateAgeCB. The letters FN are short for function. Let's switch over to the user component to accept this function as a prop. We're going to set this to function. We're not setting this to an object like we did with the age. If you are only planning to check for the type, then you don't need to set this as an object. Instead, you can directly set the type. That'll work fine. With the function added, we can use it in our code. Inside the template, we're going to make a copy of the button. However, this time we're going to directly call the callback function. We'll pass in the number 3. We're going to update the text inside both buttons. We want to be able to tell the difference between the two. Let's refresh the page to see what happens. If I were to click on the second button, then we will see the age increment by 3. The app component will continue to update the age. Both children components are provided with the changes. When we use the callback, we're basically passing in the function to the child component. However, when we call the function inside the child component, it's not like the child component has a copy of the function. Instead, it's calling the function inside the parent component. The function inside the parent component will have access to the data. Therefore, that is where the data will change. At this point, you may be wondering, which is better? Should you use callback functions or emit events? It really comes down to preference. As far as performance goes, both methods of communicating data are about the same. You won't see any significant performance gains from using either one. According to you, it's recommended to use events. Most examples you'll find in the documentation use events. For consistency reasons, I recommend using events. There is one advantage to using emitted events. I'm going to refresh the page. Then, inside the View Dev Tools, I'll switch to the Timeline tool. The Timeline tool will display a list of events emitted by our app. It'll even display events emitted by the browser. There are 3 categories of events. I'm going to click on the button that emits an event. After clicking this button, an event has been logged. We can click on this event and view the details of what the event was. We're given the name of the event. We're also provided the source. It tells us that the event was emitted from the user component. Lastly, we're given the payload. The payload is the data that was sent with the event. All of this information is useful for debugging the application. If I were to click on the callback button, then nothing will get logged, not even in the console. This makes things a bit harder to debug. Of course, you could log this manually, but that can cause more headaches than it can solve. If you were to change any names, then you would have to change the log information. With events, the names are already logged for you, so there's no need to do it yourself. This is one of the main reasons you would want to use events. On top of that, most tutorials and documentation use events for communicating data between components. Therefore, you'll see a lot of applications using that practice. At the end of the day, it's up to you. You can use callback functions or emit events.